Hello everyone, and welcome to another podcast from southwest Scotland. Today I'm on the banks of the River Clyde. When I'm standing here, I can see that to my right there's a very beautiful bridge, which is a footbridge with people walking across. And just beyond that, I can see the railway bridge where trains come in and out of the city, going to all other parts of the UK. To my left, I'm looking over at apartment blocks which have been built, replacing the older ghetto-style tower blocks which were there when I was a child. The river seems black and brown, and many things remain here of the old days when it was a port where they used to build ships. It's kind of overgrown now. There's not much trace of anything that ever happened here, and it's hard to imagine that this whole area was a customs quay. Ships coming in from different places all around the world. Recently, in the news, the government has decided that many of our statues and monuments around the city unfortunately are linked to slave traders. We have statues of landowners, people who built up this city, people who made this city great. But unfortunately, they also owned slaves. So, in many ways, even though they did great things, it's been kind of forgotten in favour of that one sad point in history. So these statues, I think there's around 10 of them, are due to be removed. And streets here, like Jamaica Street, Anderston Quay, probably will have their names changed to avoid any connection with the slave trades or with the Caribbean. Behind me is a church, which is St. Andrew's Cathedral. It's a beautiful building, but now surrounded by very high office blocks, one of which belongs to the church itself. And beyond me in the distance, on the other side of the river, I can see the minaret or the tower of Glasgow's Central Mosque. It really is the face of a city which is changing very, very quickly, and has certainly changed since I was a child. It's quite disturbing sometimes when I see the depth of those changes. But on the other hand, as the English proverb says, time waits for no man. The other thing about Glasgow which can't be overlooked is the history of the hard working Irish and Scottish men of the past. And that's kind of mixed in now with the fading idea of the financial tower block, which also once dominated this city. Throughout the 1980s, 1990s, and up until around the 2000s, if you wanted a local job here, in a lot of the old buildings, you were guaranteed to perhaps find something which you could do in an office. Perhaps as a filing clerk, perhaps as something a little bit more professional, like an accountant. And all of these old mansion houses were converted into office blocks. And now it seems they are being converted once again into residential properties of a much smaller size. Passing me now in Glasgow as I stand here, there's quite a diverse mix of people. I can see that a bunch of Muslims have just passed me by on their way to the mosque, or the masjid as it's known, on the other side of the river. A bunch of guys with turbans on their way to the Sikh temple, which lies just a few streets from here. And of course a group of Scottish drunken youths representing our locals, and indeed the face of the city. We have pubs on every street corner, drunk people on every street corner, and that's something that the government is trying hard to change. Also noticeable as I stand here would be other kinds of diversity, which is very, very welcome. There's quite a number of same-sex couples here, and Glasgow is known for being one of the most tolerant cities. But of course it has its own problems with criminality, along with other things of tribalism and violence related to alcoholism. So all in all, a very different kind of city, a very modern city, but somehow or other it keeps that spirit of friendliness and down-to-earth attitudes towards things. And I think that's because even with all the things I've mentioned, it still remains one of the poorest cities in the UK. You hear some voices in the background there, and that's of, I'm not quite sure what it is, to be honest, but it's clearly people who are perhaps in a state of distress or having an argument or something. And as I approach the main road again, you can hear the cars whizzing by, in contrast to the bads which are sitting on the river.
If there's any point where I can...
Despite the fact that the banks of the river have now been covered by a metal barrier, there are still traces of where the boats used to come in and be tied up. For example, I can still see, on looking at the pavement, rings which are hanging, which look very, very old, covered in rust but painted to make them look modern, for people who perhaps were in boats, or for the big boats which were coming into the customs quay to have their things checked. In medieval times, I suppose all of the customs were ran and operated by the local religious abbey. So I suppose that means that in the church behind me there was probably also some kind of abbey, or close by some kind of abbey on the bank of the river, to enable all of the goods to be checked for the government. Well, that's really all I wanted to say today. I hope that you've enjoyed this little walk on the River Clyde in Glasgow. My final thing I just want to say is that this river is very, very old, and it was here a long, long time before Christianity ever came here. I believe it got its name from the goddess Clwyd, or Clwti. So people used to see her as some kind of deity who controlled the river in those days when people used to live off the land. So that's where the River Clyde got its name. It would be a very old Gaelic name, probably more associated with Welsh Gaelic than Scottish Gaelic. And for those of you who don't know, Gaelic is, or was, the indigenous language of these parts before English came. Some people do still speak it. That's often a surprise for many. Some people don't realise that in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and indeed some other small places around the UK, there's a number of indigenous languages. Gaelic is probably the biggest one. I think right now about 2 or 3% of the population speak it, and it's very different from English. So there we are. That's a little trip around Glasgow. I hope you enjoyed it. And there's a couple kissing. Times really are changing. Okay, so moving on. I'll see you all again soon. And thank you.